Hazel. I am once again live to play some Sims, and today I thought I would try something new that I have been thinking about doing for a little while. I am an academic by training. I have what I like to say is half a PhD. I can elaborate that for you sometime if you would like, but I do have a fair amount of education, and there was another life in which I was on track to be a professor one day. And something that I really miss from that life is effectively info dumping, academically yapping, and sharing fun things. So I was, unfortunately, not a paleontologist or paleontology researcher, but that is something that I care deeply about, and I have a pretty decent background in for a layperson. I do engage with primary literature, and I'm lucky enough to have access to journals like Nature, and I do read the papers as they come out, as well as pop science resources, like Steve Brusati's book, which I can never recommend enough. It is freaking fantastic. I have read it so many times. The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs. And so I'm a huge dinosaur nerd, is my point. My point in saying all of that. My actual degrees and expertise is in linguistics, if you were curious about that, and I'm happy to do another series like this about anything language related. But my point in this entire preamble is to pitch you on the idea that I have for this series, which I am tentatively calling a Simposium, where I play The Sims, which is what you come here to watch me do, and I give you a little yap sesh, a little TED talk, some organized notes on a topic that I'm passionate and semi-knowledgeable about. Again, my expertise is in linguistics, so I can give you like proper expert yaps on linguistic stuff, but I can give you layperson expert level yaps on dinosaurs and outer space. I have a fair amount. There was a world in which I almost switched my undergrad major to astronomy and physics. So I like science. I like yapping. I like The Sims, and here we are. So today, and what prompted this entire idea for a series is that I really, really, really want to info dump about Nanotyrannus, and now I have a captive audience to do so too. To do so with. Please jump in. I have my little chat up here. When I open the game, the chat will be here, and I want to hear your thoughts too. So, Nanotyrannus is officially a thing, which if you don't know anything about this, you're like, what does that even mean? But what I mean is that there have been specimens of dinosaurs. We've got skeletons of dinosaurs. And some people thought that they were their own independent species, and some people thought that they were just juvenile T-Rexes, so like young T-Rex specimens. And based on, research and theories and whatnot, the general consensus in the field at some point became that these specimens, these fossils, were just young T-Rex. And what that did was give us I say us as if I'm a paleontologist. I wish. But it gave the community, the scientific community, an understanding of how T-Rexes grew, how they existed in their ecological niche, and all this kind of stuff about it. It colored how we think about T-Rex, thinking and knowing that these were young T-Rex fossils. And there is a groundbreaking paper that just came out. This is, I don't want to mess up the author name, let me double check. It is Zano L.E. et al. Nanotyrannus and Tyrannosaurus coexisted at the close of the Cretaceous. And it describes a new specimen. Anyone can be a paleontologist. Yeah, buddy. I really, one day, it's like top of my bucket list is to volunteer and volunteer at a dino dig. It'd be so freaking sick. So there's new evidence in this paper, they describe a fantastically preserved new specimen, which off the top of my head, I think was from the Hell Creek Formation in Montana. And it has some pretty clear, distinct features that differentiate it from Tyrannosaurus rex. And they make a clear argument as to why Nanotyrannus is its own taxon. Now, a caveat that I will give, and then I will open up the game and we'll start playing. A caveat that I will give about my own understanding is that I don't have the strongest grasp, generally, on what, like, taxon versus genus versus species versus whatever is in terms of, like, specificity and what the actual definitions of those categories are. I know enough to be able to articulate it to you, I think, but just take that with a grain of salt. I know that I will use the right word for whatever it is I'm describing, but I might not know exactly what that word means. Everything else I've Googled and I understand, but it's just something that's always kind of escaped me, and I don't have a background in biology. D&D terms is... Are you asking me to, or are you about to put in the chat explain it to me like it's D&D? Okay, so my thought here is that, goodness no, like I don't know, man. You work closer to the biological field than I do. So what I want to do and what I want to try to do is multitask, which technically is not possible. That's another Simposium rant I could go on another time. But I want to play the game while I chat. He said in the chat, I'm computer science, and I'm just thinking about whether or not that's closer to biology than linguistics. I guess it's not because... Hi! I guess it's not because I know things about the articulation of the human mouth. Okay, I'm gonna hop over to our gameplay window. And if you're just joining now, I gave a preamble that basically said there's a new exciting scientific finding in the dinosaur paleontology community that a debate has been settled, or at least these authors are arguing this debate is settled, and I buy it, that Nanotyrannus exists as its own taxon. So I'm going to keep chatting about this, but I do want to be... Oh, hold on. I've put the chat in a weird spot and I can't see it. As Kesha said, you are a dinosaur. Okay, so in The Sims, what brought me to the idea of doing this kind of stream anyway is that there's different collections, right? And so I just did the frog stream. New dino dropped with subclass was small. See, you get it. You can explain in D&D terms better than I can. There's different collections in The Sims, and I just did the frog breeding on stream. That is up on my channel if you want to see that. And another thing that you can collect in The Sims is fossils. So we're going to go on a fossil hunt while I yap to you about Nanotyrannus. This is my beautiful Sim. Can I put her in a cooler outfit? Let's do that. And her adopted daughter, Noodle, which we needed for a task. Froggy fossil. You know, I actually don't know what fossils are in the games. I don't know what I am looking for. If I just wear this cool alien outfit. Wait, that's adorable. I'm looking for, like, let's see costumes. Like, is there something that's dinosaur-y? There's really not. Then... and let's put on the superhero outfit. Good enough. Okay. So, I'm gonna... I like the green dress. I will save that for another outfit. I'm gonna stick with the llama. This is my daughter, Noodle. let's hop over to Willow Creek because I know that there's some digging available in the park. And then once I actually find where I'm going, we can start breaking this down. So they gave like 4 main arguments as to why Nanotyrannus is its own taxon. Sorry, is the game audio not coming through? It looks like it's not. Am I back? Can someone put in the chat? My OBS just crashed. Hello, my friends. I see you. Fantastic. Okay. That was scary. And the game audio is not coming through, so let's fix that briefly. Because I was going to ask if it was like poorly balanced because it's really loud in my ears. And I was like, should I turn my volume down or is it like not balanced? Okay. Are we hearing game audio now? There's not a lot, but there's like ambient noise. Or if I go here. Are we getting the game audio now? Beautiful. Okay. It's not important. It's just like gonna bug me if I'm doing that improperly. Okay, so while my sim chats with her boyfriend Emmett, and I look for dig spots, the authors provide 4 main arguments for the existence of Nanotyrannus as a taxon. And I think that, again, I'm bad at understanding this specific type of thing. Why is this shiny? Is it just like watered? I'm gonna collect a microscope sample. I don't know what that does, but there we go. There's a dig spot. Okay. They talk about it as a taxon rather than a species because they do identify and describe in this paper 2 separate species of Nanotyrannus. And so they talk about Nanotyrannus, what are the actual species? Different names, hold on. So, Nanotyrannus lancensis, Lancensis, and a second species, Nanotyrannus Lowave, which has a really cool etymology, actually. Let me read you that. It's really good. From Latin Letheus, adjectival form of Lethe, the mythological river Lethe of the underworld in Greco-Roman mythology. The name references both the Hell Creek formation in which the specimen was found and the depiction of the Lethe in Virgil's Aeneid, from which souls must drink to forget their prior life and be reincarnated. In recognition of our reinterpretation of this specimen as either Nanotyrannus, neither Nanotyrannus lacensis or a juvenile T-Rex, contrary to all previous literature. So I thought that that was really cool, and that specimen name is or that species rather, is the one that Jane is, who's in the Carnegie Mellon Museum of Natural History, which I went to a couple of years ago and saw her in person, and I was looking for my photo with her the other day and I couldn't find it. But so that is a specimen that has widely been called a juvenile T-Rex, and Nanotyrannus folk have called it a Nanotyrannus, and they're saying that it's a secret third thing. So that's pretty exciting. So they talk about it as a taxon, and I will talk about it. Oh, I love you too. I will talk about it as a taxon, and because they're actually talking about 2 different species within that group. And we're digging up some fossils. So the first 2 points that they make are longer and more involved because it has a lot to do with the new specimen that they're describing in this paper. And then the second 2 points are just a little bit more, they're not less important, but they're just like less detailed and less built up. So the 4 arguments that they walk through are basically, I don't like to say proving because like everything in science can always be reevaluated. We got some turquoise. That's not a fossil. Ooh, we should change our aspiration to be the curator. No, I lost what I was talking about. The first thing is that, and this kind of makes sense. If the specimens were gonna be juvenile T-Rexes, young T-Rexes, then we would expect for the fossils themselves to be young. And by that I mean like the actual age of the animal when it died would have been juvenile, if it's gonna be a juvenile T-Rex. That makes sense, right? So the first thing they did was basically test a bunch of these specimens to find out were they juvenile or not. The second thing is, I have my notes over here as well as the game. The second thing is discussing the growth trajectory while the animal was alive, and what it would mean to consider the Nanotyrannus, oops, I hit my elbow, the Nanotyrannus as growing into a T-Rex, what that would actually mean for what it would look like, that growth pattern, and whether that's even plausible. This part was the part that I found the most interesting. And then the last two sections are discussing, firstly, the way that a species or a taxon is determined is like finding unique traits that no other relative shares. And previously it's been argued that both Tyrannosaurus and Nanotyrannus have things in common that nothing else shares, but they argue that that's not the case. And then finally, they talk about, they do this fancy analysis that shows that it's not only is Nanotyrannus not a juvenile T-Rex, but they're not even that closely related. So it's pretty exciting stuff. I may have found all the dig spots in this park. So I'm gonna hop over to Oasis Springs Park, I think. I don't know, where should I go? Anyone who knows The Sims that's watching this, if you have any insight about where good dig spots are for fossils, that would be great. I kind of think there's some on one of the empty lots, actually, because I kind of think when I put Eliza somewhere, like the pancakes live there. Let's try this one. Yeah. Okay, so the first point is that if these specimens were in fact, yes, I think this is the lot I want. If these specimens were in fact juvenile T-Rexes, we would expect them to be juveniles. And they don't find that to be the case. So there's this really, really cool analysis that you can do where you look at, you know how when you cut down a tree and you look inside the wood and there's rings and it shows like how many years old the tree is? That can be the case for bones as well in animals, which is so freaking cool to me. I learned this from this paper. And you know, it can be useful, like if you're a true crime girly, I'm sure people talk about it in those podcasts for like finding the age of unknown victims and stuff like that. Like it is useful and pervasive in the world of animals with bones, vertebrates, I guess. So like we have growth rings like trees, and so did dinosaurs. So there's some really cool images in this paper where they basically took like cross sections of the different fossils and looked at the growth rings. And so the quote that I have written down here is that these analyses confirmed entry into the asymptotic growth phase before death. And so what that would mean is that their growth plateaued before they died, meaning that they like reached maturity before they died. When they look at these Nanotyrannus specimens. Sorry, I'm just gonna look at my inventory. Plant slide, diamond, turquoise. This is how you get fossils, right? From digging in the dig spots? An onion. I'm sure that it is. Oh, I got time capsules. We can open these. It's not what we're here for, but I do enjoy these. We got a Buddy! I love Buddy! Sorry. No, I'm not apologizing. I love Buddy. I grew up playing my Sims. So these trophies are actually awesome for me. Okay. I'm gonna keep looking for dig spots. There's one. Let's find some fossils. So they looked at these growth rings and basically found that the specimens that they looked at were adults. So they looked at their new Nanotyrannus specimen, as well as, let me fact check this. I think they looked at Jane, but I could be wrong. Oh, I am in the figures section. I have the paper up here too. A re-examination of the growth record. As noted by previously studied. Okay, this is interesting. So they didn't look they didn't use that same method for Jane. Like, they didn't look at her cross-section with the tray rings, but they did re-examine using a using, quote, weighted averages of 6 nonlinear mixed effects models on previous analyses, and they reassess and re-examine Jane to also be mature at time of death, which is really cool. So they're basically saying that, like, for these specimens to be juvenile T-Rex, they'd have to be juveniles, and they're not. So that in and of itself is pretty exciting. I have been interested in Nanotyrannus for a while, not like deeply so, but just kind of like in the back of my mind, because years ago I watched something either on like the History Channel or like some sketchy YouTube video that introduced me to the concept of it in this like conspiratorial tone, like, you know, everyone thinks it's young T-Rex, but really it's another dinosaur. And I loved that idea so much, so I've always kind of like hoped for Nanotyrannus, and then we just get this paper and I'm like, yes, yes. It's not even my favorite dinosaur. It's not even my favorite carnivore. I'm an Allosaurus girly when it comes to carnivores, and dinosaur overall, it's Myosaurus, which I'm happy to info-dump about as well. Okay, what else was relevant in this section? They also... Cool. Okay, so the other thing that they looked at, and the reason that this is in this section and not in the next section, where like the next section is about what's called ontogeny, and I don't know if I'm saying that right, because it's one of those things where I've only read the word, and I read it for the first time reading this paper, because again, I'm not a paleontologist, but where it talks about like growth within one animal's life cycle. It's not in that section because it is like still relevant to the bone analysis and like that kind of thing, but like, so what they finish up this section by discussing is that we haven't found a single fossil yet. They go, okay, we have found that these specimens are adults, but let's just pretend they're not. Let's assume that the Nanotyrannus specimens are the T-Rexes. It's all one thing, and these are like the children, the teenagers, the whatever. Let's model what would have to happen for that to be the case. Like, what would growth actually look like? What would maturity actually look like when we think about this, like, bone age and maturity and all that fancy science stuff? And I'm gonna quote this and then break it down. So, it would require a bimodal life history strategy, whereby post-hatching, I skipped a line. whereby Tyrannosaurus spent the first 2 decades post-hatching, slowly enlarging before entering a prolonged midlife, multi-year growth plateau, and re-emerging into a rapid multi-decadal growth phase. Such a trajectory would be wholly unique among archosaurs and contrasts with the skeletal fusion patterns of they name it, but the current specimen they're describing, which are not indicative of an animal on the precipice of extreme growth. Instead, quantitative modeling of all specimens as one taxon reveals the poor fit of these data to a single model, which would require Tyrannosaurus to exhibit 9 times the variation in body mass at about 17 years of age than present in Nanotyrannus specimens of the same age. So what they're saying is that if we pretend, assume, hope that Nanotyrannus specimens are indeed juvenile T-Rexes, we would expect them to basically grow slowly, stop growing for quite a while, and then shoot up in growth. And we can look at the patterns of growth through these rings and other analysis techniques that they talk about in this section of the paper. And we can find, if that were the case, with the analysis that they were doing, they would expect not to find them as mature, as having reached what they call like an asymptote of growth, and instead to be kind of like preparing or just beginning that like big spike of growth. And that would be predicted if they were T-Rex, and they don't find that. It doesn't, there's nothing in these fossils in this new clear specimen that they found. It's like quite well preserved. It's actually beautiful. The images of this fossil, of the new Nanotyrannus evidence. So they would expect in this like bone analysis to find evidence that they're getting ready to grow immediately, like really fast, or that they're like kind of just starting that and into that phase of growth. And yeah, they don't find that evidence. So this like bone age stuff, I don't think that I don't know if bone age is actually a term, or if it is, if it's one that's applicable here, but that's what I keep like referring to, because the jargon is all jargony, and I'm trying to make this like understandable. But basically, like the age that this the age that these dinosaurs were when they died, as revealed by the growth rings in their bones. They also looked at cross sections in like different parts of the body too, to like kind of confirm the growth and that kind of thing. So they that's kind of this first section. It's just basically talking about like, here's the evidence from these multitasking is so hard. Sorry. That's part of what I thought might be entertaining about this kind of series too, is like watching me struggle to yap and play at the same time. But yeah, basically the short of that is that the bones in the new fossil, as well as re-examination of old specimens or previously discovered specimens, reveals that they were mature and they were not on a precipice of growth. And so that's really strong evidence, in the author's opinion, in my opinion, that they are their own taxon, which is pretty cool. Okay, just gonna kind of look at our inventory. Like, why are we not finding fossils? Is that, or what is this? Fossil rock, fossil rock, fossil rock, fossil rock, extract fossil, and extract fossil. There we go. Okay, what do we have? A broken fossil, a fossilized egg. So much knowledge about it. I should date Ross from Friends. I'm a huge dinosaur nerd. I could talk about this for the rest of my life. Fossilized egg, fossilized sim hand, fossilized alien skull. Okay, we've got 3 complete fossils and a broken fossil. Let's find more while I discuss section 2. Oh, is that a dig spot? Yes. No, are those mushrooms? They're mushrooms. There's a dig spot. Okay, section 2 of this paper. Okay, the second section is what I personally found the most interesting in this paper. And I think it's because I learned a lot reading it. I learned about the bone rings in the last one, and that was really exciting. And I think that the finds from the last section are really exciting. But I personally got a lot out of this next section. What did we find? Some plumbite. So the next section is that mushrooms or a dig spot? It is mushrooms. Why do the mushrooms look so much like the dig spots? I'm not looking for like mushroom fossils. What are you? Can I dig here? I can. I don't think that's gonna get me a fossil though. So in this next section, we're going to talk about what's called ontogeny. And again, I don't know if I'm actually even saying that right, but that is, I got some limestone. That's fun. That is talking about the development of an animal within its own life cycle. So like an individual animal and its growth, or like a species or a taxon or whatever, through the lens of thinking about how one animal would go through its life cycle and grow. So when we're talking about ontogenetic traits, they are things that I have never been part of a dig. It is the top of my bucket list to volunteer on one. I really want to go out to Drumheller in Alberta, or there's some really incredible spots in Utah. That's a huge dream for me. But so when we're talking about ontogenetic traits, it's stuff that applies to that, like, I just knocked my glasses, that growth cycle. And I think that was really it's really cool to learn about, and it's really like relevant to this story in particular, because we're talking about whether or not this is a youth. Okay, so even if we ignore the evidence that there exist skeletally mature Nanotyrannus specimens, the proposed growth. Ooh, I will look into that. Thank you. Even if we ignore that we have fossils of adult Nanotyrannus, which is basically the summing up the last section, the proposed growth of a Nanotyrannus into a T-Rex is implausible for a couple reasons, and I thought these reasons were so interesting. So and part of why we know this, it really has been brought to light by the description of the specimen in this paper. And so that, I think, is important to remember, because like reading through this, and again, I am a layperson, but I am a scientist, so like I feel like I can at least empathize with the way the process works. But reading through this, you're kind of like, well, they're so different. Like, of course it's a different taxon. But a lot of this data and this new information is like what's bringing this to light. It wasn't necessarily super clear. And there was like reasonable arguments from reasonable people that would explain that away. So bearing that in mind, this is pretty exciting new evidence. And some of it is old evidence reinterpreted. But the kind of general idea here, though, is that Nanotyrannus as an animal and its trajectory, again, ontogenetically, is that the word? Yeah. Is so different from T-Rex. Is like so different. And obviously I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, because like there's a reason that they thought they were the same taxon for a long time, and we're not talking so different in the sense of like a Brachiosaurus and a T-Rex, right? Like within reason, they're so different. And so if a Nanotyrannus was going to grow into a T-Rex, it would have to change a ton. And what the authors are arguing into... Thank you. Have a great night, and I appreciate you stopping by. What the authors are arguing is that not only are these differences like big and kind of important, but also that oh, did we get a new fossil? Fossilized udder. Where are you? That's funny. I lost my train of thought. Not only are these differences like huge, they are also improbable when you think about them ontogenetically, which would be like how one would grow into the other. That's what I was trying to say. So, an example of one of these differences is that, okay, they talk about a lot of differences in the skull. I'm gonna go into detail-ish on one of them so you kind of like get the scope of what I'm talking about, but they talked about quite a few examples and all of it was extremely interesting, at least to me. So I'm gonna read you a quote, and then I'll kind of like break it down. I did have to Google some stuff. So, for example, Nanotyrannus lacks a clearly defined, I'm hoping I'm gonna pronounce these, subnarial neurovascular foramen, which is present in Tyrannosaurus and most other theropods. I also think that part is interesting. Subnarial neurovascular foramen is basically little holes in the skull under their nose, and gesturing to my own nose is not going to help because I do not have the face of a dinosaur. Okay, I happen to be sitting with a teddy bear in my lap because this is my friend Smiley. So if we pretend that he's a theropod, and while he does not look like a T-Rex, he does look more like a T-Rex than I do. There's this kind of like, snout situation going on. So under the kind of like nasal passages, under the nose, is, you know what, I'm gonna make it is Smiley diagram time. Under the like nose and like nasal area is subnarial. Neurovascular means it applies to the vascular system, which is like your veins, your arteries, the blood, and neuro is like neurology and that kind of thing. So it's like your what are those called? Nerves, and your nervous system. And so they're basically little holes that were like under the nose that allowed this chunk of nerves and chunk was an awful choice of word, but this chunk of nerves and blood vessels and stuff, like blood system stuff, to go and make its way through to the actual like snout and / or beak, dependent on species, because again this is like prevalent throughout theropods, and it's prevalent in avians too, and in birds, because it's to get the blood and the nerves to the front of their nose. And that's why it was worth, in my opinion, having my little guest here, because his snout is a lot more dinosaurial than mine, to kind of like illustrate that better. So that's the point of those holes, of those subnarial neurovascular foramen. And so it allows that stuff to make their way up to the snout. And so the Nanotyrannus didn't have very clearly defined ones, whereas T-Rex does. And what would have to happen, rather, for the for Nanotyrannus to be a juvenile T-Rex, for a skull with poorly defined subnarial neurovascular foramen to become a skull with well-defined subnarial neurovascular foramen, the blood system, like the what do they call them? The neurovascular bundles would have to, and I love this word choice, excavate holes as the dinosaur grew, like once it was out of its egg. Um, and not even just that, like quite a ways after it was out of its egg, if we're talking about these as like juvenile specimens. And so that is implausible. Like, your blood's not just gonna dig a hole through your skull. But they provide evidence that it's implausible. They don't just state it bluntly like I just did, because science. So what they say is that post-hatching alteration of topological relationships of neurovascular bundles and bones is unknown in living amniotes and arguably developmentally impossible. So what that means is they looked at the, like, just a kind of wide variety. Like when they're saying amniotes, that's like, they're not just looking at dinosaurs anymore. They're not just looking at birds anymore. They are looking at mammals. They're looking at lizards. They're basically looking at, like, off the top of my head, I don't know if I can give you an accurate definition, but I do know that it includes mammals, birds, lizards. It's like terrestrial vertebrates, question mark. It's like this big overarching thing that would include those groups, is what an amniote is. I think it has something to do with, like, the word amniote makes me think like amniotic fluid. I think it has something to do with how we are gestated. And so it's like, they looked at the huge group, or when I say huge, I mean like broad, right? Huge meaning having a lot of members, group, and they found that, like, that's not a thing that happens. For a youth to have something like, or something analogous to, poorly developed foramen, and then have the adult version have those holes develop, have the softer things like nerves and blood vessels push through your bones over time as you grow. They're like, yeah, that just doesn't happen. And here's evidence from other amniotes that are living. And they argue, they just kind of state rather bluntly that arguably developmentally impossible. There's other examples of the skull formation stuff and differences in the skulls of the T-Rex and the Nanotyrannus specimens. But I thought that subnarial neurovascular one was pretty compelling, and I thought it was like a reasonable encapsulation of the point that they were trying to make. And I thought it was really cool. I thought it was really cool. There are some other major differences between the Nanotyrannus specimens and the, sorry, I keep playing with my hat. I'm not like a hat person, but also, I don't know, it felt like the vibe today. And I keep like seeing myself in my window and I'm like, ah, she's got a hat on. Who is that girl? Maybe this is my professorial note. This is Professor Figgy Perry yapping. So there's a couple other examples of things that are like pretty fundamentally different between the Nanotyrannus specimen and the T-Rex specimens, and they are different in a way, like these subnarial neurovascular foramen, that, like, it would be weird for them to grow into the T-Rex version. So there we go. We got lots of dig spots here. Let's get some fossils. Another difference is that T-Rex have less teeth than Nanotyrannus, just like straight up. So they initially, like, other people have compared this to crocodilians, where some species in that like family, and I don't know if this is like a thing in crocodiles or if this is a thing in like prehistoric crocodilians. Like, I didn't go into too much detail, but they basically said that like other folk. Wait, did I find a minnow in that dirt pile? What? I found something. One minnow? Hold up. Pourquoi? What? Quality foul? Someone buried a dead minnow? God, I love this game. Anyway. What was I even saying? That minnow was so distracting. The teeth. So they didn't go into much detail about like what they meant specifically by crocodilians. If like you could, I'm sure, look through the sources and find what's relevant. A time capsule. Open it up. But they talked about how in some crocodilians the juveniles had more teeth than the adults. However, the adult skulls still had like indications of that same number of teeth. Like the teeth themselves were gone, but again, as a non-expert here, like I don't know if they mean there was holes there or if there was just like growth remnants or something, but what they do point out is that even in these crocodilian species there is like evidence in the adult skulls of how many teeth the youth had, and that's not the case if you compare Tyrannosaurus and Nanotyrannus. So Nanotyrannus had more teeth, and there's no real evidence to actually support like that reduction in teeth. And they also with the crocodilians, the development was a lot earlier in the actual growth cycle. So it says like there's no evidence to support like postnatal tooth reduction in them. And the only actual evidence of this kind of reduction in teeth through a growth cycle that like would be comparable, like let's say Nanotyrannus was a juvenile T-Rex and it became a T-Rex, and when it was a T-Rex it just like lost some of its teeth and its skull changed to accommodate that somehow. There is one example out of like everything. Now, how many dinosaurs were there that we don't know existed? Like, take that with a grain of salt, but there's one example, one other animal where this actually did happen, I guess. They've been extinct for millions of years. There are, what is this called? The only actual evidence of this is in ceratosaurian theropods. So it's like really kind of specific subset of theropods that lose teeth entirely and then develop a beak. So I'm about to do a like deep dive Google rabbit hole on these bad boys, because what do you mean you lost all your teeth and developed a beak in the like while you existed out of the womb? That's, or not like womb, but the amniotic fluid, whatever. Postnatally, like that's freaking wild. But that is the only example of got upgrade parts and what fossils. That's the only example of like tooth number reduction in grown species. So they're basically saying that like it's extremely implausible that that would be the case, and along with all the other evidence we present in this paper, it's just very likely not the case that they lost teeth, and just them having different numbers of teeth is probably evidence, or can be taken as evidence that they are two different taxa. I assume taxa is the plural of taxon. I'm gonna use it that way. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Another time capsule, we want fossils! And then they also look through like other tyrannosaurids, which is like the kind of larger family that T-Rex is part of. And again, because like taxon, genus, like all that kind of stuff, I'm not super strong on, so I'm not going to try and explain it. But the kind of like group, Tyrannosaurid, they looked at a bunch of them, and everything that they looked at had the same number of teeth in juveniles and adults. So that would be weird. I don't know why I keep harvesting microscope samples. I'm just like, oh, that tree looks shiny. Let's do something about it. yeah, so like not only would it be weird in general, but it would also be like extra weird compared to all the kind of related, more closely related species that we can reasonably compare T-Rex to. Okay. The last chunk of section 2 here is really interesting. Give me one moment. I may have to BRB. Sorry, folks. I never text while I stream, but it looked like it was going to be important. But it wasn't, so it's all good. Okay. I want to see what we dug up. Was it just another time capsule? Probably. Yes. Ooh, Dr. F. Okay. Let's find more fossils, please. Maybe if we go in the Forgotten Grotto. Is it Forgotten or Forbidden? I was calling it the wrong name last stream. Forgotten. Nanotyrannus. So, the last section of section 2 discusses like things that are specifically brought to light by this new find, because while they were able to use the new find, the new specimen, as evidence to support the other differences that we discussed, these two parts that I'm about to discuss are completely new finds. So the excuse me, I'm starting to get the hiccups. Hopefully that got them. The previous specimens of Nanotyrannus didn't have clear, like well-preserved fore limbs. And what's the other thing? Their tail. So the new specimen that they describe in this paper includes the first complete Nanotyrannus forelimb and tail, both of which are so different from T-Rex. And that's like why I found this section so much like the most interesting, like kind of the crux of this paper. Because like it's wild, the evidence here. So I'm gonna gloss over the forelimbs, and like briefly touch on it, just because there was like probably the most jargon, in my opinion, in the paper was like in this forelimb section, because it was really specific, describing different bones in the forelimbs and how they were or weren't fused, and I frankly didn't understand more than what I'm going to tell you, but just trust that there was more information. I'm just not about to try and translate it and accidentally spread misinformation. But the gist of the forearm section was that, speaking in absolute terms, the forelimbs of Nanotyrannus were bigger than the forelimbs of T-Rex. And so there is evidence in other species of, like, relatively speaking, the forelimbs to shrink, where proportionally the arm is smaller in comparison to the rest of the body once the animal matures. You can think about that if you look at like a human baby, their heads are so freaking big compared to their bodies, whereas an adult human, their heads are much smaller compared to their bodies. But if you put a baby head beside a human head, if you put a human baby next to a human adult and compare their head sizes, baby heads are way smaller than human heads. Then I keep saying that babies are humans. I don't mean to imply that they're not. But you see my point. There is a relative size difference there in comparison from their head to their body, my head to my body, but my head is still like bigger in absolute terms. With Nanotyrannus and T-Rex, the baby analogy is because for like pretty much everything else in the world, that's the case. Like things can get relatively smaller, but they don't get absolutely smaller. And when we're looking at the forelimbs of Nanotyrannus and T-Rex, they would have to like atrophy and like shrink down as they grew. And that doesn't make any sense. So there was more to that in the paper. There was more detail given in the paper. And there was other things too about like their fingers, but I, like, just in all honesty, didn't understand the minutia and the like details of that part, so I didn't want to try and translate it. But the gist of that section and like the kind of finding that I did understand and could take away was the size differential, and that's like freaking wild. And then the other thing too is the vertebrae in the tails, because we do finally have we did get a fossil, extract fossil. What do we get? Prehistoric bird and fossilized plant. I think we had that one already, but where's the bird? Fossilized egg, udder. Prehistoric bird. I wonder if I can look at this in the collection. Fossils. Oh, I can't make it bigger, but these are the ones we have, and we still have quite a few to go. Oh, it says stones can be dug up from rock piles, so there's no point digging in the ones that are just dirt. That's good to know. Okay. Dig. Oh, they shut off my power. Okay, I'll pay my bills. I'll pay my bills. Noodle deserves having a home with lights on. I just keep leaving my child home alone. Okay. So the other thing that was clearly described in this paper with this new specimen that we didn't have before was the tail. We have a complete, well-preserved Nanotyrannus tail in this new specimen. And that has also provided some important insight. So when we look at the tail, I still can't get over that I found a minnow in a dirt pile. That's just bizarre. Nanotyrannus in this specimen has 35 vertebrae. So like vertebrae are, you know, like in your spine's not like a one big hard thing. It's made of a bunch of little things, and those little things, those are your vertebrae. And in the Nanotyrannus specimen, there are 35. In T-Rex, there are 40 to 45, and that jump in the number in like a large-bodied terrestrial animal is just like unheard of in a growth trajectory. Like if we assume that we're looking at a young and an old, it's like, where did they get those 10 extra vertebrae? That is bonkers. So like vertebrae count, they say, is established quite early in embryonic development. So it's not even just the case that like it's established pre-birth, pre-hatch, whatever, which it is, but it's like early in that development is like how many vertebrae you have. And so like for it, oh, that's a mushroom again. These mushrooms keep tricking me. For a vertebrae count to change that much once an animal's been born, but not just once it's been born, like way into its adult life, when otherwise its growth has like reached an asymptote, like reached where it's like stopping growing. That's freaking wild. That is bonkers. That is unheard of, and so it's illogical. They're drawing the conclusion that this is not the same animal, which is really cool. Which is really, really cool. So that is the that is section 2. That is the section that I found most compelling. That is the section that I found most interesting. And I feel like I learned a lot about it. I would love to understand the arm section. If anybody is watching this either right now live or as a recording that knows stuff about this paper, about Nanotyrannus, about Tyrannosaurids in general, sorry, I got distracted by how pretty the Romantium is. I would love to know more about the differences in the arm stuff and the forearm stuff, just because that I did find that hard to understand. Let's travel somewhere else. There's got to be dig spots in other worlds. I just always know that the dig spots exist in like the... Like I wonder, probably not Samashuno, but maybe Tartosa? Like if I go over here, am I gonna find any dig spots? I should have Googled where they are before my next fossil stream, because I do think I'm gonna do this again. Let me know if you like this format. I feel like I'm starting to get the hang of playing and yapping at the same time. I mean, I already do play and yap at the same time. That is literally what I do on this channel, but I mean multitasking in the sense of like I'm discussing a topic that is not directly relevant to the gameplay rather than narrating and reacting to what's happening on my screen. So let me know if you like this, because I really like doing it actually, and I think I'm starting to get the hang of it. But yeah, if anybody knows anything about arms, or if anyone who's read this paper who knows even like a little bit more than I do about that kind of thing, I would love to know more. I don't see any dig spots here. Okay, maybe I'll just go back to Oasis Springs. There are 2 more sections in this paper, which I think help round it out and help create a... Or, you know what, let's check out one more, because I wonder if I go to the... I was just in the park, though. I feel like I would have noticed. Let's go over here. They kind of round out the paper. They provide further arguments and evidence, and it just gives us the overall picture that we are indeed looking at a separate taxon. So section 3 is, and they're not actually like strictly numbered, but it's like the 3rd section of their structured argument, which I will refer to as section 3. Whoa. This place is cool. Wait, I've never been here. This would be so cute for like a proposal. Jay Huntington. Actually, I think Jay Huntington already... I think I've played through the proposal. I just haven't posted it yet. I'm gonna go view this for a moment because I think it's cool. So the next section they talk about what's called autopomorphies. And again, biofolk, paleontology folk, please correct my pronunciation. But it's a unique derived trait found in only one taxon, distinguishing it from all others, including closest relatives. So this is basically part of how we identify what a taxon is, right? And that's kind of what the whole point of this paper is saying Nanotyrannus is a taxon. Just like it is its own thing. It's separate from T-Rex is the argument they're trying to make. And so previous literature has identified 13 different autopomorphies. So basically 13 different things in common. But these researchers point out, and they basically go through citing other papers and say that 12 of the 13 are already widely disputed. And the last one is... Now, what was this term? This was an interesting word to me. The last is homoplastic in these taxa. So I googled what homoplastic means, and it is basically it doesn't have to be inherited to be the same. like it's something that I'm butchering this. But it's like something that like it has the flavor of like convergent evolution, but it's not exactly the same. Like it's like the idea is like you can kind of have like this type of thing. If it is homoplastic, it means you can have it in common between two taxa and not have that mean that they are the same taxon. That's the vibe. So where's my notes? So they're like the 12 are widely disputed, just as things in common, and the 13th is something that like even if it is in common, that doesn't mean they're related. So the 13th one being, it was like a wide, it was a wide temporal region in the skull, and so they're like in Tyrannosaurus because it's like a ratio, right? It's not an absolute measurement. So in Tyrannosaurus, the ratio is because the temporal region itself is wide, and in Nanotyrannus, it's because the rostrum, which is another like part of the skull, is proportionally and relatively narrow. So like it's not wide in the same way. And that kind of takes us to that idea of homoplasticity, where things can be the same for different reasons. And then it says several other characters merit further discussion, and they go on to list a bunch of examples that are kind of similar to that as an analogy. Like they have things in common, but they are different in this sort of different way. So I'm not going to go through every one of their examples, but that's kind of like what that section is about. And then the traits that they oh, is that a dig spot? The traits that they like don't argue away in that way. They point out are common throughout other close members of the family. So they're like, it's not this specific term, autapomorphes, because it doesn't delineate specifically one taxon, because it's common in other ones. And so like you can't say, oh well, this means it's a T-Rex because it's also in, I'm not just going to pull a dinosaur name off the top of my head because I'm going to make one up that's not right, but you understand what I'm saying. We got another time capsule. We got a Hopper and we got a Chef Gino. Okay, let's go back to Oasis Springs, I think. So that is, that's the gist of section 3, is the idea that like the things they have in common aren't actually good pieces of evidence for things they have in common, effectively. And then finally, we have reached section 4, which admittedly is the part that I not that I had the most difficulty with, because that was the arm section in terms of the details, but the sorry, I have a Kleenex box on my floor because it's usually where my elbow is currently sitting, and I have just kicked it by accident. That's what that noise and or distraction was. The last section is the phylogenetic position of Nanotyrannus. And in modern paleontology, let me explain what they're talking about first, and then I'll like kind of explain how they got there. So we're looking at basically like family trees between different species and taxons and genuses and such. Again, this is where it gets a little murky for me. I do understand what they're saying in this section, though. I just don't know how well I can articulate and explain it. But like, you know, you look at this like almost elementary school biology, the concept of like the way the tree works evolutionarily. And so there are different groupings, right? And things get more and more specific, and that gets to taxons, it gets to species, what have you. So when we're talking about phylogenetics, that's what we mean. It's like the genetic trajectory, for lack of a better word, of a species within the kind of evolutionary tree. And so we look at the phylogenetics of Nanotyrannus, and in modern paleontology, so like kind of the way that people figure out how things are related to each other in general has to do with those kind of like autapomorphies that we were just discussing in section 3. So it's basically like, you know, how similar are these two things? Okay, here's a third thing. How similar is thing 3 to each of these two things? Which ways is it similar? How are the different parts related, and how does that similarity tell us about which one came first, etc. I hope that I'm explaining that well. My understanding of this type of thing comes strictly from like how languages are related. Like I can tell you, about, French and Spanish are more closely related than French and English because of basically phylogenetics. And we find it out in the similar way of like we compare features and what do these different features have in common, or what do these different languages rather have in common feature wise, and where do these features come from in terms of relationships. So like that's where my understanding of this is coming from. And so sorry, I thought I saw that we got another fossil rock. Did I? No, we got, oh, cool. So that's kind of like how the place in the tree is determined, right? But in modern paleontology, there are basically fancy computer ways to like do that for you, so you're not, sitting there manually comparing individual specimens, and slash or like conglomerated data on individual taxons manually. So what they do is like, what did they do? It was a couple different mixed effects models, right? Or was it Bayesian? Phylogenetic analysis employing maximum parsimony under equal and implied weights and Bayesian inference, with and without geologic calibration and character partitioning, unambiguously recover the genus Nanotyrannus outside Tyrannosauridae. That is one heck of an opening line for this section. But basically, so they're saying, yeah, they're using Bayesian modeling, which is basically, goodness me, don't ask me to explain Bayes theory. I have learned it so many times. I know it enough to be able to apply it, but goodness. I actually love statistics. I'm a big stats nerd. But Bayesian modeling has to do with like probabilities and like kind of assigning probabilities to stuff. And so it can kind of look at a huge, I'm butchering this. It can, I have taught many a subject. Statistics is not one of them. It can basically look at a bunch of data and do I'm extremely butchering this. It has to do with probabilities, and it's really good fancy analysis, and smart people use it. When I need to do a Bayesian analysis, I have people that I text for that. So if you want to know about Bayes' theorem, I would recommend not me as a resource, but trust that I trust it, and that a lot of science uses these types of models already, and science fields that don't already use it are like moving toward it. Like it's becoming way more common in my area of study, which again is not actually paleontology. Where are the dig spots? Sorry, I always get frustrated playing The Sims when I am looking for collectibles. This is why I don't usually do this quest, but at this point I'm on a mission to find fossils. Let's pretend I didn't just embarrass my statistical knowledge in front of a live audience on YouTube, and instead take my word for it that Bayesian modeling is a reasonable choice to make in trying to work out taxonomic, is that a word? I hope so. Relationships, phylogenetic positioning within a dinosaur evolutionary tree. Like, I do think that's a good move. And if you have more questions, ask someone that's not me. But my point in ridiculously long tangent was that they basically use fancy statistical modeling that takes into account all the information that we do have about the specimens, including the new ones, the new specimen, rather, the singular, that we've been discussing this whole time, that has, you know, the first complete tail that we have, the first complete forearms, etc. And so they take all of that. Dig for treasure. What? Oh, this is fun. Yeah, let's dig for treasure. I just yanked my headphones out of my ears and slid my computer over because I'm using corded headphones. Okay, let's dig for treasure. What do we get? What do we get? What do we get? A capsule. Open it up. Goth boy. Like, that's cool, but couldn't I just, like, get Goth boy? Okay. Anyway, I got distracted by the treasure map in the game. Yeah, they use basically fancy statistical modeling with the information that they get from the actual specimens, from all this research, and they have come to the conclusion. This whole long ramble was getting to that they've come to the conclusion that not only is Nanotyrannus not a T-Rex, but it's not even that closely related. Mic drop. I think that's really freaking cool. So there is a group called Tyrannosauridae, which includes subgroups Tyrannosaurinae, which is where T-Rex lives, and Albertosaurinae, which by the name you can imagine includes Albertosaurus. And they argue for another group. Okay, so you've got your Albertosaurinae, Tyrannosaurinae, encapsulated by Tyrannosauridae. Beside Tyrannosauridae, you have Nanotyrannus, and then those two are lumped together under Eutyrannosauria. It's EU Tyrannosauria. So I don't know if that's like Oi Tyrannosauria, if that's like O Tyrannosauria. I'm gonna imagine it comes from Latin or something similar, and I don't speak that, so I am not good at estimating its pronunciation. But I think that's really freaking cool. I think that's really freaking cool that, like, we can look at these, you know, pieces of evidence that the specimen is different and that it is not just a juvenile T-Rex, and we can feed it into these Bayesian statistical models and find that, yeah, it is different. It is very different. Really freaking cool. Really, really freaking cool. Generate more dig spots, please. Please, please, please. I want to find fossils. Let's go back to the Willow Creek Park, I guess. So that is, in summation, the 4 main points of evidence that they provide. And then the final section, their kind of conclusion, goes into why this matters and what this means for the field, and I'm excited to dive into that as well. But to recap, the 4 main points were that the specimens we have of Nanotyrannus are adults. They have finished growing. And so, like, they can't be teenage T-Rex if they're not teenagers. Point 2 is that the differences between Nanotyrannus specimens and T-Rex specimens are not the kinds of differences that are predicted to be able to change between a juvenile and an adult specimen, like the holes, the nose holes thing. The third point is that the commonalities between the specimens are not unique between T-Rex and Nanotyrannus in a way that would categorize them as the same taxon. So either things aren't actually really that in common, or they are common within a broader group that they're both part of. And then finally, the phylogenetic analysis reveals that they are actually pretty... Why did my sim just spend $18 to grill a veggie burger? Bestie. The phylogenetic analysis reveals that not only are they not the same taxon, but they are rather, relatively speaking, distantly related, rather than being under contention as like related or like the same animal. They go from being the same animal to being like cousins. So, why does this matter? Number one, because it makes Figgy Perry really happy. I was so thrilled to see this. I hopped on. I have a group of nerds that I hang out with. I have a one of my group chats on Discord with friends has like a channel strictly for dino news and facts, because we're all interested in dinosaurs. And ooh, I found a dig spot. Let's go. And I like, as soon as I heard the news, I ran to my computer and I like turned it on and I opened Discord and I was like, guys, Nanotyrannus, and someone else had already broken the news, because that's how like groundbreaking and exciting this was. I opened my Discord to find a gif of the One Piece is real with just the Nanotyrannus as a caption. So reason number one why this matters is because it's freaking awesome, just objectively. But actual science reasons why it matters. The general consensus was that, oh, did we find a fossil? We found a fossil. Extract fossil. What do we get? Hilariously tiny T-Rex arms. How freaking, like, how there's a word I'm looking for. Relevant, for lack of a better word. There's a very specific word I'm looking for. But we literally just talked about how Nanotyrannus' arms were bigger than T-Rex's arms, and that's like part of this whole discussion. And of course we got hilariously tiny T-Rex arms. Let's freaking go. I love The Sims. Okay. One reason why this matters, why this is actually important, why this is a groundbreaking discovery, why nature decided to put out basically a preprint before they've even like proofread it. There's like a watermark on the paper that's like, you know, subject to formatting changes and stuff, but there's literally like a note at the beginning of the paper that is like, nature is providing this early version of the typeset paper as a service to our authors and readers, because like that's how big a deal this is. So like, it's not just the case that there was like a longstanding debate about whether these specimens were young T-Rexes or if they were their own taxon. The debate existed, but the general consensus in the field, that is what they're claiming, that is my understanding as a layperson who's super invested in this, the general consensus was that it was a juvenile T-Rex. And so this is like a groundbreaking paper in that I distracted myself because I was like, aren't all paleontology papers groundbreaking because you have to dig up the fossils? God, that was a terrible joke. But this one is extra groundbreaking because it disputes with very solid evidence, with a new fossil find that is well described and well argued, that the general consensus in the field might not be correct. That's fun. That is science, man. So that's a pretty big deal. Oh, I found a limestone. Let's extract a fossil. What do we get? What do we get? A raptor claw and a prehistoric bird. Let's look at our collection. Nice. These are so cool. Okay, so we've still got 6 left. We can do it. Another reason that it's important is that this is going to prompt some pretty serious reevaluation of the specimens we do have, like the existing fossils that we already have and have studied in this kind of area, in this family. The Tyrannosaurus rexes that we have, like, we're gonna look at in a different, and again, I keep saying we as if I'm a paleontologist, but you know, I am in my heart. It's giving Ratatouille, anyone can cook, you know what I'm saying? But like, yeah, there's a lot of reevaluation now that's going to happen of the fossils that we already have, of the Nanotyrannosaurs, Nanotyrannuses that we have, of specimens like Jane, of specimens like this new one, of like all the different Tyrannosaurus rexes we have. And that's cool. That's really cool. We're going to have to think about it through this new lens because, like, I mean, this kind of goes into the next point. Yeah, it undoes a fair amount of what we thought we knew about Tyrannosaurus growth. And so, like, paleontologists and, like, you know, dinosaur scientists, evolutionary scientists, etc., have been working under the reasonable, supported assumption that these specimens are juvenile T-Rexes. And what that means is that, like, we had a picture of what we thought T-Rex was, and it's different now. And that's so cool. That is what science is all about. This it's not on the same scale as, like, finding out they had feathers, because that kind of applied to, like, everything, and that's really cool. But if you care about, like, T-Rex, this is, in my opinion, kind of that, at that scale. Like, it's a pretty important, it's a pretty revolutionary piece of evidence, an argument, and it totally changes what we know about T-Rex. And like I was saying at the beginning, earlier in this stream, like, we've kind of had the belief, and again, supported by evidence until now. Like, that's what's so cool about science, so exciting about science, that T-Rex had this, like, bimodal growth period, and it just doesn't now, because we know that Nanotyrannus is its own taxon, or we have very strong evidence that it's its own taxon, and that's really exciting. That's really exciting. It's so much opportunity. I feel like we're gonna get so much cool research out of this about T-Rex, because now people are gonna be like, okay, we know that these specimens aren't T-Rex. What do we now know about T-Rex? So freaking cool. And other tyrannosaurids and whatnot, like, things that they're related to. I think that this also paints an interesting picture for. I'm just gonna cheat my needs up. It also gives us information about the ecosystem, and Tyrannosaurus rex's place in it. It very much was like an apex predator. Like, that's not up for a dispute right now. I jest, but, you know, it tells us more about, like, the food chain, because not only does Nanotyrannus exist, but we have to kind of think about now, what does it mean for this to exist as its own species? What that means is that there was another predator that didn't take up the same niche, but took up a niche in the North American Cretaceous context that, you know, maybe competed with T-Rex, or at the very least, T-Rex didn't overshadow into its niche because Nanotyrannus existed. And so it does prompt questions about the ecosystem, about the relationships with the food chain, about the relationships with other predators, with other dinosaurs. Um, and that's a really cool kind of like outcome of this as well, is considering what that means for the whole landscape of the North American Cretaceous. I say North American, I don't know off the top of my head how widespread these were, but they are found in Hell Creek, the same as T-Rex. Like they're roughly in a North American context. But like I have no idea if they were up here in Canada, if they were further south in North America. Like I don't know. And then finally, although probably not finally, but the last point that they make in the paper as to why this like matters is that the is this section 4 is this the analysis that they did, the Bayesian modeling that they did, that gives us a different evolutionary tree for where Nanotyrannus fits into the picture. It gives us some pretty interesting information about where and how different species coexisted, because like for things to evolve into each other, there is some level of proximity and like physical closeness. One thing you can learn from evolutionary data is like migration of species and families, because like let's say you find species A 100 years ago in China, and then you find species B that is clearly a descendant from 50 years ago in, I don't know, Russia. You can use the dating information, the genetic information, and where the fossils were found to piece together that, oh, this species must have slowly moved from China to Russia or wherever, whatever. And so one thing I didn't really know, just because I haven't really thought about it much, is that this kind of like overarching like Eutyrannosauria, again I'm mispronouncing probably, but the overarching family that includes the Albertosaurinae, the Tyrannosaurinae, and the Nanotyrannidae. Yeah. That big overarching family that we've been talking about. That Sorry, noodles yapping is distracting me from my yapping. That family, I guess there's evidence of them making like a kind of migration like that from Asia to North America over some kind of land bridge, or like, I don't know, things move around, things were continents. In the Cretaceous, things were a lot closer to being how they are now than they were, like, we're thinking like Pangea. But there's like land bridges and stuff. And so this change to the, what is this? Phylogenetic relationships of Tyrannosaurus rex and Nanotyrannus and what have you, for folks that use that information to learn about like the migration and how they get from place to place, how different species moved across the world, spread across the world rather. This is some really interesting information. And there are species that, like, if I want to look at the figure again. Well, this is detailed. Yeah, I am too bad at understanding these trees to be able to articulate it better, so I'm not going to try. But basically, there are relationships there between species that are in different areas, and the authors say that like this is going to be useful and interesting for researchers that work in that area. So overall, this is just an absolutely wild discovery. Really well argued, in my opinion, paper. Concise, clear. I loved the word excavate being used to discuss the neurovascular bundles having to having to excavate the skull. I thought that was really well done. And we found some fossils while we were chatting. If we look at our fossil collection, I think we have 6 more to find. We've got the raptor claw, the fossilized what's-it, hilariously tiny T-Rex arms, prehistoric bird, fossilized plant imprint, fossilized udder, fossilized alien skull, fossilized sim hand, and fossilized egg. Sorry, I just read the description. That's hilarious. While this egg will never hatch, one can still wonder if there's a baby dinosaur hidden inside, or if it's just the undeveloped yolk of a giant, prehistoric mega chicken. Yeah. That is all for my Simposium. Please let me know in the comments in the chat on any of my socials if you liked this format, if you liked this idea. I hope that in the future, if I do this kind of thing, honestly, when I do this kind of thing, I really do like to lecture and chat about nerd stuff. That I will get better at multitasking. Because I do think that I physically struggled a little bit trying to collect the fossils while I was chatting. But I really had fun. I really had fun. And I'm so grateful for anybody watching live or recorded. If you like this video, I would really appreciate a like. I would appreciate a subscribe. I would appreciate you sharing with your pals, because also, yes, this was a long-winded, almost 2-hour rant, but I would like to think that I did break down a scientific paper reasonably understandably for lay folk. So if anybody's interested in Nanotyrannus and this new paper, again, it is called, I've written the citation in the description of the video. It is by Lindsay Zano and James Napoli. Zano, L.E. et al. Nanotyrannus and Tyrannosaurus coexisted at the close of the Cretaceous. This was published very recently in Nature. I would like to think that I explained it decently. So if you have, friends that are interested in pop science, I would love if you shared it with them. Please let me know if you like this series, and I will see you when I see you. I've been trying to live stream on Fridays at 5 p.m. EST. I have been enjoying this time slot. I have had feedback from viewers that this is a good time slot for you, so I will probably see you next Friday. Maybe I will yap about Wicked, because I will have seen Wicked for good the night before. I never know how to end streams, but thank you for hanging out with me. I hope you have wonderful dreams of dinosaurs, because I hope that I will. Peace out. Thanks for hanging out.